Hello everyone, this is Bethlehem Atfield. Welcome to the podcast Journey to Ethiopia with a Story. A few months ago, I received a request from an old friend, Dr. Balcha, asking me if I could make a program on Zara Yacob. Thank you, Balcha, for the suggestion and for taking your time to review this piece. Ḥatäta Zär'a Yacob, a 17th century Ethiopian philosopher's treatise. Western canon asserts that the Enlightenment period began with René Descartes in 1637, continuing on through John Locke, Isaac Newton, David Hume, Voltaire, and Kant for around 1.5 centuries. But Doug Herbjørnsrud asked, what if the story is wrong? What if the Enlightenment can be found in places and thinkers that we often overlook? He says such questions have haunted him since he stumbled upon the work of the 17th century Ethiopian philosopher. Zara Yacob was born on 28 August 1599 into a rather poor family on a farm outside Aksum, the legendary former capital in northern Ethiopia. At school, he impressed the teachers and was sent to a new school to learn rhetoric, ሰዋሰው in Ge'ez, poetry and critical thinking, ቅኔ, for 4 years. Then he went to another school to study the Bible for 10 years. Ethiopia has been Christian since the early 4th century, rivaling Armenia as the world's oldest Christian nation. In the 1620s, Portuguese Jesuits convinced King Susunyos to convert to Catholicism, which the king adopted and imposed as Ethiopia's official religion, triggering a 7-year period of instability and civil war. Persecution of free thinkers followed suit. Zara Yacob, who was teaching in the Aksum region, had declared that no religion was more right than any other, and his enemies brought charges against him to the king. Zara Yacob fled at night, taking with him only some gold and the Psalms of David. He headed south towards Ḥatäta River, where he found an uninhabited area with a beautiful cave at the foot of the valley. Zara Yacob built a fence of stones in the cave and lived as a hermit for 2 years until the death of the king in September 1632. He lived in that cave, only venturing out to the nearby market to get food. There, in the peace and solitude of the cave, far from conflicts among humans, he elaborated his new rationalist philosophy. He believed in the supremacy of reason and that all humans, male and female, are created equal. He argued against slavery, critiqued all established religions and doctrines, and combined these views with a personal belief in a theistic creator, reasoning that the world's order makes that the most rational option. In short, many of the highest ideals of the later European Enlightenment had been conceived and summarized by one man, working in an Ethiopian cave from 1630 to 1632. After the death of King Susunyos, Zara Yacob left his cave to live again among people and at last settled down in Imphras, a town located between the present-day cities of Gondar and Bahar Dar. He stayed in Imphras for 60 years. There he taught his philosophy, wrote his treatise, or Hatata, in 1667, married, established his family, died, and was buried. It is in Imphras where his philosophy, first elaborated in the solitude of Ḥatäta region, matured to full expression in his life, in his teaching, and in his writings. Zara Yacob's reason-based philosophy was presented in his main work, Treatise, or Hatata, meaning the inquiry. The book was written on the insistence of his student Walda Heywat, who himself wrote a more practical-oriented Hatata. Today, 350 years later, it's hard to find a copy of Zara Yacob's book. The only translation into English was done in 1976 by the Canadian professor Claude Sumner, published as part of a 5-volume work on Ethiopian philosophy. Far away, grappling with similar questions, was Zara Yacob's French contemporary, Descartes. A major philosophical difference between the two is the Catholic Descartes explicitly denounced infidels and atheists, whom he called more arrogant than learned in his Meditation of First Philosophy, published in 1641. This perspective is echoed in a letter concerning toleration written by Locke in 1689, which concludes that atheists are not at all to be tolerated. In contrast, Zera Yacob shows a much more secular and inquiring method, which also reflects an openness towards atheistic thought. Chapter 4 of the Hatata starts with a radical question:
is everything that is written in the Holy Scriptures true?
He goes on to point out that all the different religions claim theirs is the true faith.
Indeed, each one says, "My faith is right," and those who believe in another faith believe in falsehood and are the enemies of God. As my own faith appears true to me, so does another one find his own faith true. But truth is one.
In this way, Zera Yacob opens up an enlightened discourse on the subjectivity of religion. His discussion of whether or not there is a God is more open-minded than Descartes', and possibly more accessible to modern-day readers, as when he incorporates existentialist perspectives.
Who is it that provided me with an ear to hear? Who created me as a rational being, and how have I come into this world? Where do I come from? Had I lived before the Creator of the world, I would have known the beginning of my life and of the consciousness of myself. Who created me?
In Chapter 5 of Ḥatäta Zär'a Ya, he applies rational investigation to the different religious laws. He criticizes Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and Indian religions equally. For example, Zera Yacob points out that the Creator, in his wisdom, has made blood flow monthly from the womb of women in order for them to bear children. Thus, he concludes that the law of Moses, which states that menstruating women are impure, is against nature and the Creator, since it impedes marriage and entire life of a woman, and it spoils the law of mutual help, prevents the upbringing of children, and destroys love. In this way, Zera Yacob includes the perspective of solidarity, women, and affection in his philosophical argument, and he lived up to these ideals. After Zera Yacob left the cave, he proposed to a poor maiden named Herod, who served a rich family. He argued with her master, who did not think a servant woman was equal to an educated man, but Zera Yacob prevailed. When Herod gladly accepted his proposal, Zera Yacob pointed out that she should no longer be a servant, but rather his peer, because a husband and wife are equal in marriage. In contrast to Zera Yacob's view, Kant wrote a century later in 1764 in his Observation on the Feelings of Beautiful and Sublime,
"A woman is embarrassed little that she does not possess certain high insights."
In his lecture on ethics, we read that the desire of a man for a woman is not directed at her as a human being. On the contrary, the woman's humanity is of no concern to him, and the only object of his desire is her sex. Zera Yacob looked upon the woman in a completely different way, namely as a philosopher's intellectual peer.
Herod, he wrote, was not beautiful, but she was good-natured, intelligent, and patient.
He cherished his wife's intelligence, and he stressed their mutual individualistic love for one another.
Since she loved me so, I took the decision in my heart to please her as much as I could, and I do not think there is another marriage which is so full of love and blessed as ours.
Zera Yacob is also more enlightened than his Enlightenment peers when it comes to slavery. In chapter 5, he argues against the idea that one can go and buy a man as if he were an animal. That is because all humans are created equal and with the capacity to reason. Hence, he also puts forward a universal argument against discrimination based on reason.
All men are equal in the presence of God, and all are intelligent since they are his creatures. He does not assign one people for life, another for death, one for mercy, another for judgment. Our reason teaches us that this sort of discrimination cannot exist.
The words, "all men are equal," were written decades before Locke, the father of liberalism, put pen to paper. Indeed, he was born the same year that Zera Yacob returned from his cave. But Locke's social contract theory did not apply to all in practice. He was secretary during the drafting of the fundamental constitutions of Carolina in 1669, which gave white men absolute power over their African slaves, and he himself invested heavily in the English transatlantic slave trade. Compared with his philosophical peers then, Zera Yacob's philosophy, which he incorporated into his daily life, often reads like the epitome of all the ideals we commonly think of as enlightened. Thank you for listening. Please read the discussion points under the description of this episode. We would like to hear your views on these points and any other observation you may have. If you'd like to listen to more stories as soon as they are released, please subscribe to this channel. Until the next story, goodbye.